The fluorescent lights above my hospital bed flickered with that familiar institutional hum as I stared at the real estate contract in my trembling hands. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine, yet somehow it was legally binding. My son Trevor's neat handwriting filled the power of attorney section, a document I'd signed months ago thinking it would only be used for emergencies. I suppose in his mind my stroke had qualified as exactly that kind of emergency. What I hadn't anticipated was that he'd consider my entire life disposable in the process. "You don't need it anymore, Mom," he'd said just 3 hours earlier, his voice carrying that patronizing tone I'd grown to dread over the past 2 months of my recovery. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house is too big, too much maintenance. This way you'll have the money for proper care. He'd gestured around the sterile hospital room as if it were some kind of upgrade from the Victorian home I'd spent 37 years restoring, room by room, memory by memory. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was holding the papers that proved my son had sold my life's work while I lay unconscious, fighting for that very life. The same life I'd rebuilt from nothing after his father abandoned us when Trevor was 12. The same hands that now shook from medication had once stripped wallpaper until 2 a.m., painted shutters in the rain, and planted every rosebush in what the neighbors called the most beautiful garden on Maple Street. But Trevor didn't know about the garden's secret. He didn't know about a lot of things. "The buyer wants immediate possession," he'd continued, scrolling through his phone with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather. "I've arranged for a moving company to pack your essentials. The rest will be donated or sold. Clean slate, Mom. Isn't that what everyone wants at 73? What I wanted was to be back in my kitchen, brewing coffee in the pot I'd bought the day Trevor graduated from college, the graduation I'd funded by working 3 jobs and taking night classes to finish my own degree. What I wanted was to tend to my prize-winning roses that took me 15 years to perfect. What I wanted was to run my fingers along the carved banister his father had installed during one of his brief periods of sobriety, back when we still believed he might stay. Instead, I was trapped in this adjustable bed, my left side still weak from the stroke, my speech slurred enough that the nurses spoke to me like I was a confused child rather than a woman who'd built a successful landscape architecture business from her living room table. A business that Trevor had always been slightly embarrassed by, preferring to tell his corporate friends that his mother was retired rather than explain that she designed gardens for half the wealthy families in the county. "Where exactly am I supposed to live?" I'd managed to ask, each word a struggle past my still rebellious tongue. Trevor had smiled, that practiced, professional smile he used with difficult clients at his marketing firm. "I've found you a lovely assisted living facility, Sunset Manor. They have activities, meal service, medication management, everything you need. Everything except freedom. Everything except the life I'd built. Everything except the respect of my own child." He'd left after that, promising to handle everything with the same efficiency he brought to his advertising campaigns, as if my existence was just another account to be managed, streamlined and optimized for his convenience. Now alone with the contract and the steady beep of the heart monitor that seemed to echo my growing rage, I studied the sale price. It was fair. I'd raised Trevor to be many things, but dishonest wasn't one of them. The $430,000 would indeed cover years of assisted living care. But that wasn't the point, was it? The point was that he'd stolen my choice. He'd decided, while I lay fighting for consciousness, that my life as I'd known it was over. What Trevor didn't realize was that his timing couldn't have been worse, or perhaps, from my perspective, it couldn't have been better. You see, just 2 weeks before my stroke, I'd received a phone call that would have changed everything if I'd been conscious to receive it. A phone call from Jennifer Walsh at the National Landscape Architecture Society, informing me that I'd been selected to receive their Lifetime Achievement Award, not just the award, but the contract to design the memorial garden for the new children's hospital, a $2.8 million project that would have been the crown jewel of my career. Trevor knew nothing about the nomination I'd submitted 6 months earlier. He knew nothing about the portfolio I'd been secretly compiling for years, documenting every innovative garden design, every problem I'd solved, every impossible space I'd transformed into something beautiful. He saw only an aging mother who grew flowers in her backyard, not a professional who'd been quietly revolutionizing therapeutic garden design for trauma recovery. The call had come to my house phone while I was unconscious. Jennifer had left 3 messages before giving up, assuming I was no longer interested. The opportunity had a deadline, Proposals were due next Friday. 4 days from now, I pressed the call button with my good hand, my fingers steadier than they'd been in weeks. When Nurse Patricia appeared, the one who actually listened when I spoke rather than just nodding sympathetically, I managed to form the words clearly enough to be understood. "I need to make a phone call. It's urgent." Patricia glanced at the clock. "Visiting hours are over, Mrs. Anderson. Can it wait until morning?" "No," I said, and for the first time since my stroke, my voice carried the authority I'd once used to convince skeptical clients that their impossible slopes could become cascading water gardens. "It absolutely cannot wait." What happened next would either destroy the small amount of family I had left, or teach my son the most important lesson of his 35 years. Never underestimate a woman who's built something from nothing, especially when you've just given her nothing left to lose. The phone number for the National Landscape Architecture Society was still programmed in my cell phone. Jennifer Walsh was about to learn that reports of my retirement had been greatly exaggerated, and Trevor was about to discover that selling someone's life out from under them was only a good strategy if you were absolutely certain they had no way to buy it back. The phone felt heavy in my shaking hand as I waited for Jennifer Walsh to answer. While it rang, my mind drifted back to how this all began. Not the stroke, not even Trevor's betrayal, but the real beginning. The day I decided to sacrifice everything I'd built for the promise of my son's future. It was 18 years ago. Trevor had just graduated with his business degree, drowning in student loans and full of ambitious dreams about starting his own marketing agency. I remember him sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by rejection letters from investors who wouldn't take a chance on a 23-year-old with no collateral and big ideas. "I just need seed money, Mom," he'd said, his voice cracking with frustration. "50,000 to cover office space, equipment, initial staffing. I've got the clients lined up, I've got the business plan. But banks won't touch me without assets." I'd been quietly successful by then. My landscape architecture business, Serenity Gardens, had grown from weekend projects to high-end residential designs. I'd just signed my biggest contract yet, a $180,000 therapeutic garden for the Riverside Medical Center. The money was supposed to be my retirement fund, my security blanket, my proof that a woman could build something lasting with her own hands. But Trevor was my son, my only child. The boy I'd raised alone after his father decided that responsibility was incompatible with his artistic temperament and disappeared to find himself in Colorado. I'd worked 3 jobs to keep Trevor in good schools, sold my mother's jewelry to pay for his college applications, and driven a car with 200,000 miles so he could have decent clothes and opportunities. So I gave him the money. All of it. "It's a loan," he'd insisted, drawing up official papers with interest rates and payment schedules. "I'll pay you back with interest once the business takes off. This is an investment in our future, Mom, both of ours." The payments had come regularly for the first 2 years. Trevor's agency, Dynamic Marketing Solutions, had indeed taken off. He'd landed major accounts, hired staff, moved into a prestigious downtown office. I'd been so proud watching him succeed beyond my wildest dreams. But then the payments became irregular. "Just a temporary cash flow issue, Mom. Big client is late on payment." Then they stopped altogether. "The business is expanding so fast, I need to reinvest everything. You understand, right? It's all going to pay off." When I gently asked about the loan after year 5, Trevor had gotten defensive. "Mom, you know I'm good for it. But right now I'm trying to build something significant. Something that will take care of both of us long term. Can't you just trust me?" So I'd trusted him. I'd watched him buy the house in the expensive subdivision, marry Rebecca with her diamond ring and destination wedding, lease the BMW and the boat. I'd smiled at family dinners when he talked about his success, never mentioning that I was still driving the same old Honda, still shopping at discount stores, still turning down thermostat in winter to save money. The irony was that while Trevor's business was growing, so was mine. Quietly, steadily, my reputation had spread beyond residential gardens. I'd pioneered a technique for using native plants in therapeutic settings that helped trauma patients recover faster. My healing gardens were being installed in hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and veterans facilities across 3 states, but Trevor had never shown interest in my work. When people asked what his mother did, he'd say she's retired or she does some gardening. Never that she was an award-winning landscape architect whose innovative designs were changing how medical facilities approached patient recovery. The most painful part wasn't the money. It was the invisibility. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At his wedding, when the photographer asked about family, Trevor had posed with Rebecca's parents, the successful real estate developers, while I stood awkwardly to the side. When he'd bought his current house, the sprawling colonial with the perfectly manicured lawn, he'd hired a landscaping company instead of asking for my help. Professional work requires professional contractors, Mom, he'd explained when I'd offered to design their garden for free. No offense, but this is a significant investment. We need someone with commercial credentials. Commercial credentials? I'd had commercial credentials since before he was born, but he'd never bothered to learn that. The stroke had happened while I was working on my most ambitious project yet, the proposal for the National Landscape Architecture Society's Memorial Garden. I'd been researching healing plant combinations for children who'd experienced trauma, working 16-hour days because the design meant everything to me. It was my chance to prove that therapeutic landscape architecture could be more than just pretty gardens, it could literally save lives. I'd collapsed in my greenhouse at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, surrounded by sketches and soil samples. The neighbors found me the next morning when they noticed I hadn't brought in my newspaper. By the time I woke up, 3 days had passed, and Trevor had already begun making decisions about my life. The first thing he'd said when I regained consciousness wasn't, "I'm glad you're okay," or "I was so scared." It was, "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation." This was a wake-up call. A wake-up call. As if my stroke was some kind of gentle reminder that I should gracefully fade into irrelevance rather than the medical emergency it actually was. "Mrs. Anderson," Jennifer Walsh's voice startled me back to the present. "I didn't expect to hear from you. We'd given up on receiving your proposal." My words came slowly but clearly. I'd been practicing. "Miss Walsh, I had a medical emergency. I'm calling to ask if the deadline can be extended. I had extraordinary circumstances. I'm sorry to hear about your health issues," she said kindly. "But the committee meets Monday morning. We'd need proposals by Friday to have any chance of review." "I can make Friday," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, "but I'll need help. I'm currently in the hospital, and my son has complicated things." What I didn't tell her was that Trevor's complications had just become the motivation I needed to create the most spectacular comeback of my career. The next morning brought Trevor back to my bedside, armed with a tablet and the kind of forced cheerfulness that made my teeth ache. He'd brought Rebecca this time, probably thinking her presence would make me more agreeable to whatever new arrangements he'd made for my life. "Good morning, Mom," he said, pulling up a chair with the practiced efficiency of someone conducting a business meeting. "You're looking much better today, more alert." Rebecca hovered near the window, her perfectly manicured fingers scrolling through her phone. She'd always been polite to me in that distant way people reserve for elderly relatives they're obligated to acknowledge but don't particularly want to engage with. "I've been busy this morning," Trevor continued, opening his tablet with a flourish. "I've got the moving company scheduled for Thursday, and I've arranged a tour of Sunset Manor for this afternoon. The director, Mrs. Patterson, is very excited to meet you." My hands gripped the hospital bed rails. "I told you yesterday, I'm not going to assisted living." Trevor's smile never wavered, but I caught the flash of irritation in his eyes. "Mom, we've been through this. You had a stroke. You can't live alone anymore. It's not safe." "Says who?" "Says common sense," Rebecca interjected from the window, not bothering to look up from her phone. "Trevor's been worried sick about you living in that big house all alone. We all have." The lie sat in the air between us like a bad smell. Rebecca had visited my house exactly 3 times in the 8 years she'd been married to my son, and each time she'd spent the entire visit checking her phone and making pointed comments about how quaint and outdated everything was. "The house sale is final," Trevor said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone again. "The new owners take possession Friday. I've arranged for the moving company to put your essentials in storage and deliver what you'll need to Sunset Manor." "What I'll need," I repeated slowly. "And who decided what that would be?" Trevor pulled up something on his tablet. "I've made a list. Your bedroom furniture, some clothes, a few personal items. The rest is just clutter, Mom. You don't need 3 sets of china or all those gardening tools, or that room full of design awards, gathering dust." Design awards gathering dust. My breath caught in my chest. Those awards represented 30 years of professional achievement, recognition from the American Society of Landscape Architects, the International Association of Horticultural Therapists, the National Healthcare Design Awards. Each one marked a project that had helped people heal, had brought beauty into spaces of pain and recovery. To Trevor, they were clutter. "I want to see the list," I said. He hesitated for just a moment before handing me the tablet. As I scrolled through his inventory of my life, my vision began to blur, not from the stroke, but from rage so pure it made my hands shake. Under items for disposal/donation, all gardening tools and equipment, professional design software and computer, file cabinets containing project portfolios, awards and certificates, greenhouse contents, reference library, gardening and design books, photography equipment, drafting table and supplies. He was throwing away my entire career. Everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, everything that proved I was more than just his aging mother, gone. "You can't," I whispered. "Mom, be reasonable. Where would you put a drafting table in assisted living? When would you ever use those design programs again? The greenhouse alone will take 2 dumpsters to clear out." "Those are my tools," I said, my voice growing stronger. "My work, my life." Rebecca finally looked up from her phone. "Margaret, honey, you're retired. You don't need work tools anymore. It's time to let go and enjoy your golden years." Golden years, like I was a discarded piece of jewelry being politely relegated to a drawer. "I'm not retired," I said clearly. "I'm on medical leave." Trevor laughed, actually laughed. "Mom, you're 73 years old and you just had a stroke. You can barely hold a pen steady. It's time to accept reality." That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the casual dismissal of my abilities, or the way he talked about my life like it was already over, or the fact that he was literally throwing away evidence of my professional existence. But suddenly the fog of medication and confusion lifted, and I saw the situation with perfect clarity. My son didn't see me as a person with value, agency, or ongoing potential. He saw me as a problem to be managed, a liability to be contained, a burden to be efficiently minimized, and he was about to learn just how wrong he was. "Get out," I said quietly. Trevor blinked. "What?" "Get out of my room. Both of you." "Mom, you're being irrational." "I am being perfectly rational," I interrupted, my voice carrying an authority I hadn't used in years. "You've stolen my house, my belongings, and my autonomy while I was unconscious. You've made decisions about my life without consulting me, and now you're sitting here telling me what I can and cannot do with my remaining years. Get out." Rebecca stepped forward. "Margaret, Trevor's only trying to help." "Help?" I turned to look at her directly. "Is that what you call it when someone sells your home without permission? When they throw away your life's work? When they force you into an institution against your will?" Trevor's face was reddening. "I have power of attorney." "For medical decisions," I said firmly. "Not for selling my house, not for disposing of my property, and certainly not for deciding that my life is over." The silence that followed was electric. Trevor stared at me like I'd suddenly sprouted horns, while Rebecca looked genuinely shocked that I'd raised my voice. "You have until tomorrow," I continued, "to cancel whatever arrangements you've made with Sunset Manor, and you will stop the moving company from touching my professional equipment." "Or what?" Trevor asked, his mask of patient concern finally slipping to reveal the anger underneath. I smiled for the first time in days. "Or you're going to discover that your supposedly helpless, confused mother is far more capable than you ever imagined." After they left, Trevor muttering about post-stroke confusion and Rebecca making sympathetic noises about elderly stubbornness, I reached for my phone again. Jennifer Walsh answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Anderson, I was hoping you'd call back, about that extension." "I don't need an extension," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I need an assistant and a computer, and I need to know if you can arrange for the committee to see my presentation remotely." "Remotely? I'm about to prove that a stroke doesn't end a career," I said. "It just changes the venue." Within 2 hours of my conversation with Jennifer Walsh, I had transformed my sterile hospital room into something resembling a command center. It started with a single phone call to Maria Santos, my former assistant who had worked with me for 5 years before moving to California. When I explained my situation, she didn't hesitate. "Mrs. Anderson, I can be on a plane tonight. Just tell me what you need." What I needed was a miracle, but Maria was the closest thing to it. She arrived the next morning carrying 2 laptops, a portable scanner, and a determination that matched my own. The nurses weren't sure what to make of the sudden transformation of room 314 from a place of recovery to what one of them called mission control. First things first, Maria said, setting up the equipment on my bedside table. I contacted your neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She has a key to your house, right? I nodded. Mrs. Chen had been watering my plants and collecting my mail since the stroke. She was also one of the few people who truly understood the scope of my work, having watched me transform her own backyard from a barren slope into a award-winning healing garden for her late husband's dementia care. She's going to photograph every single item in your studio and greenhouse before the moving company touches anything. We'll have documentation of what Trevor was planning to throw away. The thought of my life's work being treated as garbage still made my chest tight, but now I had a plan. Maria pulled up the preliminary sketches I'd been working on before my stroke, and suddenly I could see the memorial garden taking shape again. The Children's Hospital wants something that helps young trauma patients, I explained, my words coming more easily as I focused on the work. Traditional playground equipment doesn't work for kids who've experienced abuse or medical trauma. They need spaces that feel safe, that give them control. Maria nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she took notes. What about sensory elements? Different textures, sounds. Exactly, I was thinking hidden alcoves where they can retreat, plants they can touch and smell, water features they can control, and the pathways need to have multiple options, no dead ends that might trigger claustrophobia. We worked for 3 hours straight, my mind sharper than it had been since before the stroke. The medication fog seemed to lift completely when I was doing what I loved, designing spaces that could heal. Maria sketched while I dictated, and slowly the memorial garden came alive on the computer screen. That's when Trevor walked in. He stopped dead in the doorway, taking in the scene. Me sitting up straighter than I had in weeks, surrounded by laptops and papers, clearly in charge of some kind of operation. Maria looked up from her work and smiled politely. You must be Trevor. I'm Maria Santos, your mother's assistant. Assistant? Trevor's voice cracked slightly. Mom doesn't have an assistant, she's retired. Actually, I said, not looking up from the design we were reviewing. Maria worked with me for 5 years before she moved to Los Angeles. She's here to help me finish a project. Trevor stepped closer, his eyes scanning the equipment and papers. What kind of project? Mom, you're supposed to be resting. I'm working on a proposal for the National Landscape Architecture Society, I said calmly. A $2.8 million memorial garden for the new Children's Hospital. The silence stretched between us. I could practically hear the gears turning in Trevor's head as he tried to process this information. 2.8 million? Rebecca's voice came from behind him. She'd been lurking in the hallway, probably checking her phone again. The deadline is tomorrow, Maria added helpfully. We're just putting the finishing touches on the presentation. Trevor's face was cycling through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been panic. Mom, you can't be serious. You had a stroke. You can barely. I can barely what? I asked, finally looking directly at him. Think clearly? Use a computer? Design a garden that could help traumatized children heal? He gestured vaguely at the room. This is all very nice, but it's not realistic. You're not well enough for this kind of stress. Maria cleared her throat. Actually, Mrs. Anderson has been working at full capacity for the past 3 hours. Her design concepts are revolutionary. The committee is going to be very impressed. Committee? Rebecca stepped forward. What committee? The selection committee for the Memorial Garden project, I explained patiently. They're reviewing proposals from landscape architects across the country. The winner gets the contract and the recognition that comes with designing the premier therapeutic garden for pediatric trauma recovery. Trevor sank into the visitor's chair, his composure finally cracking. Mom, even if this is real, even if you could somehow win this thing, where would you live? How would you manage a project like that? The house is sold. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt since waking up in this hospital bed. That's an interesting question, Trevor. I'm glad you asked. Maria reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. We've been researching that too. It turns out there are legal issues with the house sale. What kind of legal issues? Trevor's voice was barely a whisper. The kind, I said softly, that arise when someone uses a medical power of attorney to make financial decisions they're not authorized to make. The color drained from Trevor's face as Maria opened the folder and spread several documents across my bedside table. Rebecca moved closer, her phone forgotten for the first time since she'd arrived. Medical power of attorney, Maria explained, pointing to the first document, covers healthcare decisions only. It doesn't extend to selling property or making major financial transactions. She pulled out another paper. This is the real estate contract your son signed. Notice anything interesting about the date? Trevor leaned forward reluctantly. I watched his eyes scan the document until they stopped at the signature line. This was signed 2 days after your stroke, Maria continued, while you were still in the ICU, unconscious. I was protecting her interests, Trevor said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. The market was good, the house was too big. The market, I interrupted, was actually at a seasonal low. December is the worst time to sell residential property. Any realtor would have told you that. I paused, letting that sink in. If you had bothered to ask me. Rebecca was reading over Trevor's shoulder now, her face growing pale. Trevor, you said she had signed papers agreeing to this. She had given me power of attorney. For medical decisions, Maria repeated firmly. Mrs. Anderson never signed any document authorizing the sale of her home. We've checked with her attorney. That's when my hospital room door opened again, and Dr. Patricia Williams walked in. Not a nurse, but my actual attending physician. She was younger than I'd expected when Maria had told me about her, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of confident demeanor that came from years of fighting for her patients' rights. Mrs. Anderson, Dr. Williams said warmly, I understand you wanted to see me about your cognitive assessment. Trevor straightened up. Doctor, my mother has been under tremendous stress. She's been working on some kind of project all day, and I'm concerned about her mental state. Williams looked at him with polite interest. And you are? Trevor Anderson, her son. I have medical power of attorney. I see. Dr. Williams picked up my chart and flipped through it. Well, Trevor, I have good news. Your mother's cognitive function tests from this morning show she's operating at full capacity. No signs of confusion, memory loss, or impaired judgment. The silence that followed was deafening. Trevor's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Full capacity? Rebecca whispered. Completely normal for her age and education level, Dr. Williams confirmed. In fact, her scores were quite impressive, above average in all categories, including complex problem-solving and decision-making abilities. I felt a surge of vindication so powerful it made me dizzy. For weeks, Trevor had been treating me like a confused child, making decisions based on his assumption that my stroke had left me mentally compromised. Now here was medical proof that I was exactly as sharp as I'd always been. Furthermore, Dr. Williams continued, I understand there are some concerns about living arrangements. I want to be clear that there is no medical reason Mrs. Anderson cannot return to independent living. With physical therapy and some minor accommodations, she should be able to manage her own household within a few weeks. Trevor was staring at the doctor like she'd just told him the sky was falling. But she had a stroke. She could fall. She could have another episode. The same could be said of anyone, Dr. Williams replied calmly. Your mother's stroke was relatively minor, and her recovery has been excellent. There's no reason to treat her as an invalid. Maria chose that moment to drop the next bombshell. Which brings us to the legal situation, she said, pulling out another set of papers. We contacted the buyer of the house this morning. You what? Trevor's voice cracked. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, lovely people by the way. They were very understanding when we explained the situation. It turns out they have elderly parents themselves, and they were horrified to learn that the sale had been conducted without the homeowner's knowledge or consent. Rebecca grabbed Trevor's arm. What is she saying? They've agreed to cancel the sale, Maria continued smoothly. Apparently they were already having second thoughts about the purchase price. As Mrs. Anderson mentioned, December isn't the best time to buy either. They're getting their earnest money back, and the contract is being voided. Trevor shot to his feet. You can't do this. I was acting in her best interests. She needs care. I said, my voice cutting through his protests like a blade, to be treated with respect. I need my son to trust that I'm capable of making my own decisions, and I need him to understand that I'm not ready to be put out to pasture just because I had a medical emergency. Dr. Williams was watching this exchange with the kind of professional interest that told me she'd seen similar family dynamics before. Mrs. Anderson, have you given any thought to what you'd like to do when you're discharged? I smiled, feeling more like myself than I had in months. Actually, I have several options. I could stay in my house, which will no longer be sold. I could accept a position designing a memorial garden for the children's hospital. Or, I paused, savoring the moment, I could pursue legal action against someone who fraudulently used medical power of attorney to make unauthorized financial decisions. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Trevor's face had gone from pale to ashen, and Rebecca was staring at him with a mixture of shock and what looked like dawning horror. "Mom," Trevor said weakly, "surely we can work this out as a family." "We can," I agreed, "but first you need to understand something very important. I'm not your helpless mother who needs to be managed. I'm Margaret Anderson, landscape architect, and I'm far from finished with my life. Word travels fast in hospitals, and apparently my transformation from helpless patient to formidable businesswoman had become the talk of the 7th floor. Over the next few hours, a steady stream of visitors began appearing at my door, not family or friends but professionals who had somehow heard about my work. It started with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the pediatric psychiatrist who would be working with children in the new memorial garden. She knocked tentatively, carrying a tablet and wearing the kind of excited expression I remembered from my younger colleagues when they discovered a new approach to therapy. "Mrs. Anderson, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I heard through the grapevine that you're working on the Children's Hospital Memorial Garden proposal." Trevor, who had been sitting in stunned silence since Dr. Williams left, looked up sharply. "More people know about this?" "Dr. Mitchell," I said, ignoring Trevor completely, "please come in. I'd love to hear your thoughts on therapeutic garden design for pediatric trauma patients." As she entered, I caught sight of someone else in the hallway, a man in an expensive suit talking quietly with one of the nurses. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't place him. "I've been following your work for years," Dr. Mitchell said, pulling up a chair. "The healing garden you designed for the Veterans Hospital in Portland? Revolutionary. The way you incorporated sensory elements specifically for PTSD patients, we've never seen recovery rates like that." Rebecca's head snapped up from her phone. "Recovery rates? Mrs. Anderson's therapeutic gardens have been studied extensively," Dr. Mitchell explained. "Patients who spend time in her designed spaces show 40% faster recovery times and significantly reduced anxiety levels. She's pioneered an entirely new field of trauma-informed landscape architecture." I watched Trevor's face as this information sank in. He was learning more about his mother's professional achievements in 5 minutes than he had bothered to discover in 35 years. "The Memorial Garden proposal," Dr. Mitchell continued. "It's exactly what we need, a space designed specifically for children who've experienced medical trauma, abuse, or loss. Your concept of choice pathways where kids can control their environment. Brilliant." Maria beamed proudly. "Show her the sensory alcoves," she suggested. As I pulled up our design on the laptop, the man from the hallway appeared in my doorway. Now I recognized him, James Morrison, the local investigative reporter who had covered several of my high-profile garden projects over the years. "Mrs. Anderson," he said with a warm smile, "I hope you remember me, James Morrison from Channel 7 News. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your current project." Trevor stood up abruptly. "This is a private hospital room. You can't just—" "Actually," James said, looking at Trevor with professional interest, "I'm here because we received an anonymous tip about a fascinating story. A renowned landscape architect working on a major project from her hospital bed after her son attempted to sell her house without permission." The room went dead silent. Rebecca's face turned white, and Trevor looked like he might be sick. "Anonymous tip?" I asked, though I had a suspicion about who might have made that call. Mrs. Chen had always been protective of me, and she had a tendency to call reporters when she felt injustice was being done. "The tip mentioned that despite recovering from a stroke, you're completing a proposal for the largest therapeutic garden project in the state. Is that true?" Before I could answer, Dr. Mitchell jumped in enthusiastically. "She's not just completing it, she's revolutionizing it. The design incorporates trauma-informed principles that could change how we approach pediatric mental health recovery." James was taking notes now, and I could see Trevor calculating the implications of this becoming a news story, a story about a son who tried to dispose of his accomplished mother like unwanted furniture. "Mrs. Anderson," James continued, "our research shows you've won 14 major awards for therapeutic garden design, including the International Association of Horticultural Therapy's Lifetime Achievement Award, yet our sources suggest your family wasn't aware of your professional reputation." I glanced at Trevor, who was staring at the floor. "My son has been very busy with his own career," I said diplomatically. "We haven't had many opportunities to discuss my work." Trevor Anderson, right? James consulted his notes. Of Dynamic Marketing Solutions? Interesting coincidence. We actually did a feature on emerging businesses about 5 years ago. I believe we interviewed you about your startup funding. Trevor's head jerked up, panic flashing in his eyes. You mentioned having an angel investor who believed in your vision, James continued. Someone who provided the initial capital that launched your success. I don't suppose you'd be willing to share who that investor was. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Rebecca was staring at Trevor with dawning realization while Dr. Mitchell looked confused by the sudden tension. Mr. Anderson? James pressed gently. Our viewers are always interested in heartwarming stories about people who help young entrepreneurs achieve their dreams. Trevor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He couldn't very well admit on camera that his angel investor was the same mother he'd just tried to declare incompetent and warehouse in assisted living. The investor, Trevor finally managed, preferred to remain anonymous. I smiled serenely. How thoughtful of them, I said. It's so rare to find people willing to sacrifice their own financial security for someone else's dreams without expecting recognition. James was clearly picking up on the undercurrents. Mrs. Anderson, as someone who's obviously dedicated her life to helping others heal, what would you say to families who might be struggling with how to support their aging parents? I'd say, I replied, looking directly at Trevor, that the greatest gift you can give someone is to see them for who they truly are, not who you assume they've become. After James Morrison left with promises to follow up on the story, the hospital room felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Dr. Mitchell had departed with genuine excitement about collaborating on the memorial garden, leaving me alone with Trevor, Rebecca, and Maria. The silence was deafening. Trevor was pacing now, his corporate composure completely shattered. This is insane, Mom. You've turned my attempt to help you into some kind of media circus. Help me? I set down the laptop and looked at him directly. Let's be very clear about what your help actually entailed, Trevor. Rebecca moved closer to her husband, but I could see uncertainty in her eyes. The confident woman who'd dismissed me as a confused old lady was beginning to understand that she'd seriously misjudged the situation. You want to discuss this? I continued, my voice steady but charged with months of suppressed anger. Fine, let's discuss it all. Maria, would you please read the timeline we put together? Maria pulled out her notes, consulting them with professional efficiency. 2 days after Mrs. Anderson's stroke while she was unconscious in the ICU, Trevor Anderson signed a real estate contract using fraudulent power of attorney. 3 days later, he contacted Sunset Manor to arrange immediate placement. 5 days later, he scheduled a moving company to dispose of her professional equipment and life's work. I was protecting, you were disposing of me, I interrupted, like I was already dead. Trevor stopped pacing and turned to face me, his face flushed with defensive anger. You're 73 years old. You had a stroke. I was trying to make sure you were safe and cared for. Without asking me, without waiting for me to recover enough to have an opinion about my own life, because I knew you'd be stubborn about it. The words burst out of him before he could stop them. I knew you'd insist you were fine, that you could handle everything yourself just like you always do. The honesty of his frustration was startling. For a moment, I saw past the successful businessman to the scared 12-year-old boy whose father had abandoned him, who'd grown up watching his mother struggle to hold everything together alone. So you decided to take that choice away from me entirely. I decided to take care of you the way you took care of me, Trevor said, his voice cracking slightly. I decided to make the hard decisions so you wouldn't have to. Rebecca reached for his arm, but he shook her off. The stress was clearly getting to both of them. The way I took care of you, I repeated slowly. Trevor, when I gave you that $50,000 to start your business, did I make the decision for you? Did I tell you what kind of company to start, where to locate it, who to hire? That's different. How is it different? Because you were investing in my future. You believed in my potential. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with irony. And what makes you think I don't still have potential? What makes you think my future is over? Trevor's face crumpled slightly. Because you scared me, okay? When I got that call from the hospital, when they said you'd had a stroke and might not wake up, I realized how much I'd taken you for granted, how much I'd ignored you while I was building my career. This was the closest thing to honesty we'd had in years, and I felt my anger soften slightly, but not enough to excuse what came next. So your solution was to take control of my life without consulting me. My solution was to make sure you were safe and comfortable for whatever time you had left, whatever time I had left. My voice rose sharply. Trevor, I had a minor stroke, not terminal cancer. Dr. Williams just confirmed I'm completely cognitively intact. Rebecca finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. Trevor, when you told me about your mother's condition, you made it sound like she couldn't make decisions anymore. Trevor spun around to face his wife. She couldn't. She was unconscious, then confused, then stubborn about accepting help. I was recovering, I corrected firmly, from a medical emergency. That doesn't make me incompetent. The $50,000, Maria said quietly, consulting her notes again. Mrs. Anderson, should we tell them about the loan documents? I nodded grimly. Trevor, when I gave you that money 18 years ago, you signed a promissory note. With interest, you currently owe me $127,000. Trevor's face went white. Mom, you know the business has expenses. The business has been profitable for years, I interrupted. You bought a house, a boat, took expensive vacations. You had the means to repay me, but you chose not to. I was going to pay you back when what? When I was dead and couldn't collect. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. That's not, I would never, wouldn't you? I asked quietly, because from where I'm sitting it looks like you wrote me off as a declining asset years ago. Someone who gave you what you needed, and could then be quietly managed until she became too inconvenient to keep around. Rebecca was staring at Trevor now with obvious horror. Trevor, is this true? Did you really owe her that much money? It's more complicated than that, Trevor began, but his voice lacked conviction. No, I said firmly, it's actually very simple. You took my money, my trust, and my autonomy, and when I became vulnerable, instead of protecting me, you tried to erase me. The silence that followed was broken only by the steady beep of my heart monitor and the distant sounds of hospital activity in the hallway. So what happens now? Trevor asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and sacrificed for and loved unconditionally, and felt the weight of 35 years of complicated emotions. Now, I said, you're going to learn what it means to face consequences for your actions. The knock on my hospital room door came at exactly the moment I needed it most. Trevor was standing there looking defeated, Rebecca was pale with shock, and I was about to deliver an ultimatum that would change our family forever. Then fate intervened in the form of Dr. Elena Rodriguez. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from decades of making important decisions. She wore an elegant navy suit that suggested executive status, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone used to being listened to. Mrs. Anderson, she asked, stepping into the room with purposeful energy. I'm Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Chief Administrator for the Children's Hospital Foundation. I apologize for the interruption, but I couldn't wait another moment to meet you. Trevor looked confused. I'm sorry, who are you? Dr. Rodriguez barely glanced at him, her attention focused entirely on me. Mrs. Anderson, I've just spent the last 2 hours reviewing your memorial garden proposal with our board of directors. My heart stopped, but the deadline isn't until tomorrow. We received your preliminary submission this morning, she said, her eyes lighting up with excitement. Jennifer Walsh forwarded it to us immediately. Mrs. Anderson, in 30 years of healthcare administration, I have never seen anything like what you've designed. Maria beamed proudly beside me, but I was too stunned to react. You've already reviewed it. We called an emergency board meeting. Dr. Rodriguez continued. Your concept for trauma-informed landscape architecture, specifically designed for pediatric patients, it's revolutionary. The sensory alcoves, the choice pathways, the therapeutic plant selections, everything is based on actual research and real understanding of how children heal from trauma. Rebecca was staring at the doctor with obvious confusion. I'm sorry, but what exactly is this about? Dr. Rodriguez turned to her with professional courtesy. Your mother-in-law has just submitted a proposal for the most innovative children's therapeutic garden ever conceived. We're not just talking about a pretty space with flowers. This is a scientifically designed healing environment that could change how we approach pediatric mental health recovery. Trevor's mouth fell open. She did this from a hospital bed. Not just from a hospital bed, Dr. Rodriguez replied, but while recovering from a stroke, which makes what she's accomplished even more remarkable. She turned back to me. Mrs. Anderson, I'm here because our board has voted unanimously. We don't want to wait for the formal selection process. We want to offer you the project immediately. The room went silent except for the steady hum of medical equipment. I felt dizzy with the magnitude of what she was saying. The board is prepared to offer you a $3.2 million contract, Dr. Rodriguez continued, 20% above our original budget, because what you've designed is worth every penny. But there's more. She paused, looking around the room at my family's shocked faces. We want to create a permanent position for you as our Director of Therapeutic Environment Design. It's a consulting role that would allow you to design healing spaces for children's hospitals across the country. The salary is $180,000 annually, plus project fees. Trevor's legs gave out, and he sank into the visitor's chair. Mrs. Anderson, Dr. Rodriguez said softly, you've just become one of the most sought-after specialists in the country. The silence in the room was absolute. Dr. Rodriguez's words hung in the air like a physical presence while Trevor stared at me as if I'd suddenly transformed into someone he'd never seen before. Which, in a way, I had. $3.2 million, Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. Plus a salary of $180,000 annually, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. With full benefits, research budget, and travel allowances for consulting work. Mrs. Anderson would essentially become the pioneer of a new field. I found my voice finally. Dr. Rodriguez, this is extraordinary. But I need to ask, what kind of timeline are we looking at for the garden project? 18 months from contract signing to completion, she replied. We'd want you to oversee every aspect personally. Your vision is what makes this special. Trevor's face had gone through several color changes, settling on a pale green that matched the hospital walls. Mom, he said hoarsely, you never said anything about being nationally recognized or having this kind of career potential. You never asked, I replied simply. In fact, when I tried to discuss my work, you'd change the subject or suggest I should take it easy at my age. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and showed me something that made my breath catch. Mrs. Anderson, there's something else you should know. Word has already spread about your hospital room design process. We've received calls from 3 other major children's hospitals asking if you'd consult on their therapeutic garden projects. 3 other hospitals. Seattle Children's, Boston Children's, and the new pediatric wing at Johns Hopkins. They're all willing to wait for your availability and pay premium consulting fees. Maria was grinning so widely I thought her face might split. Mrs. Anderson, you're about to become the most in-demand therapeutic landscape architect in the country. This is insane, Trevor muttered, running his hands through his hair. Yesterday I thought my mother needed assisted living, and now what exactly is she now? She's a nationally recognized expert whose work could revolutionize pediatric healthcare, Dr. Rodriguez said matter-of-factly. The garden design she created incorporates breakthrough research in trauma recovery that most professionals in the field haven't even heard of yet. I looked at Trevor, really looked at him, and saw the exact moment when the full implications hit him. His mother wasn't a burden to be managed. She was a professional whose career was just hitting its peak. She didn't need to be tucked away in assisted living. She needed an office, a staff, and the freedom to travel the country revolutionizing children's healthcare. The house sale, he said suddenly, his voice hollow. If you're going to be working on all these projects, traveling, consulting, you'll need your home office, your design studio. Yes, I said quietly. I'll need my professional space, my equipment, my files, everything you were planning to throw away or donate. Rebecca was looking at her husband with something approaching horror. Trevor, do you realize what you almost did? You almost destroyed your mother's career at the exact moment it was about to explode into something incredible. But I wasn't finished. There was one more revelation that would complete Trevor's education about just how much he'd underestimated his mother. Rodriguez, I said, there's something else my family should know about my financial situation. Dr. Rodriguez looked at me with curiosity while Trevor and Rebecca leaned forward, probably expecting to hear about some hidden debt or financial crisis that would explain my unrealistic career ambitions. Maria, I said calmly, would you please show them the investment portfolio summary we put together? Maria pulled out a folder and spread several documents on my bedside table. The numbers were clearly visible, and I watched Trevor's eyes scan the pages with growing disbelief. This can't be right, he whispered. What can't be right? Rebecca demanded, grabbing one of the pages. Her face went white as she read. Trevor, this says she has $847,000 in diversified investments, I finished for her, plus the house, which is worth approximately $430,000. I'm not exactly the destitute widow you thought you were rescuing. Dr. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow but said nothing, clearly understanding that she was witnessing a family reckoning. But how? Trevor stammered. You live so simply. You drive that old Honda. You shop at discount stores. Because I'm not wasteful, I replied. Because I learned to live within my means while building financial security. Because unlike some people, I don't confuse lifestyle with net worth. The dig hit its mark. Trevor's expensive suits, leased BMW, and boat payments suddenly looked like what they were. The financial choices of someone living beyond his actual means. Your mother, Maria added helpfully, has been quietly investing the profits from her landscape architecture business for decades. She owns rental properties, has a substantial retirement account, and maintains a diversified portfolio that's been consistently outperforming the market. Rebecca was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. You mean when Trevor said you needed financial help? I was financially more secure than both of you combined, I confirmed. The house sale was never about my financial need, Trevor. It was about your assumption that I was helpless. Dr. Rodriguez cleared her throat gently. Mrs.
Anderson, I should mention that the consulting position I've offered would likely increase your annual income substantially.
Between the salary and project fees, you'd be looking at approximately $300,000 per year. Trevor made a sound like a deflating balloon. Which brings me to the new terms of our relationship, I said, looking directly at my son. First, you will never again make decisions about my life without consulting me. Second, you will treat me as the competent adult I am, not the burden you assumed I'd become. Third, we will address the matter of the $127,000 you owe me. Mom, I'm not finished. My voice carried the authority I'd used with difficult clients for decades. Fourth, you will publicly acknowledge that your angel investor was your mother, and you will thank her properly for sacrificing her financial security for your dreams. The room was silent except for the steady beep of my heart monitor. And finally, I continued, you will apologize, not just to me, but to yourself, for nearly destroying something beautiful because you couldn't see past your own limited vision of what your mother could be. Trevor's face crumpled. For the first time since I'd woken up in this hospital bed, I saw my son, really saw him, and recognized the scared, guilty man beneath the corporate facade. Mom, he whispered, I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. I know you did, I said softly. That's what makes this so heartbreaking. 6 months later, I stood in the completed memorial garden at Children's Hospital, watching a 7-year-old girl named Emma carefully select which path to take through the sensory maze I'd designed. She'd been in a car accident that killed her parents, and this was her first time venturing out of the hospital building since her arrival 3 weeks ago. The garden had exceeded every expectation. The hidden alcoves provided safe spaces for children to retreat when overwhelmed. The therapeutic plants, lavender for calming, mint for sensory stimulation, sunflowers for hope, had created an environment where healing happened naturally. The choice pathways meant no child ever felt trapped or forced along a route they didn't want to take. Mrs. Anderson, Dr. Mitchell appeared beside me, carrying a tablet full of data. I wanted to share the preliminary results with you. The numbers were remarkable. Children who spent time in the memorial garden showed 60% faster recovery from trauma symptoms, their sleep improved, their anxiety decreased, and their willingness to engage in therapy increased dramatically. We weren't just treating symptoms anymore, we were creating healing. The board is ecstatic, Dr. Rodriguez had told me during our last meeting. We're getting calls from children's hospitals around the world asking for your consultation. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria, who had permanently relocated back to work with me full-time. Seattle Children's just approved the design. Construction starts next month. Johns Hopkins wants to meet next week. The success felt surreal sometimes. My calendar was booked solid for the next 18 months with consulting visits, speaking engagements, and design projects. The modest home office that Trevor had nearly thrown away had been expanded into a full design studio with 3 additional staff members. But the most meaningful change wasn't professional, it was personal. Trevor had kept his word about all of my conditions. He'd publicly acknowledged me as his angel investor during a Business Journal interview, speaking with genuine gratitude about my sacrifice and support. He'd begun making monthly payments on the loan, along with a heartfelt letter each time explaining what my investment had meant to his life. More importantly, he called me regularly now, not to check on my health or offer unwanted advice, but to actually talk, to ask about my work, to share his own challenges, to rebuild the relationship we'd nearly lost. Rebecca had surprised me the most. She'd started volunteering in the memorial garden, reading to children who were too anxious to play. "I never understood what you did before," she'd admitted one afternoon. "I thought gardening was just gardening. I didn't realize you were creating spaces that save lives." The house had been transformed too. My studio buzzed with activity as my team worked on designs for hospitals across the country. The greenhouse had been expanded and now contained research plants for different therapeutic applications. The place Trevor had wanted to sell because it was too much house for one person had become the headquarters for a revolutionary approach to pediatric healthcare. But tonight was special. Tonight Trevor and Rebecca were coming for dinner. Not because they felt obligated, but because they wanted to hear about my latest project and share their own news. Finally, after 73 years, I felt truly seen by my own family. The dining room table was set with my grandmother's china, the same china Trevor had once listed as clutter to be donated. Soft light from the chandelier illuminated the faces of my son and daughter-in-law as they shared their news with genuine excitement, rather than the obligatory politeness that had characterized our family dinners for years. "We're pregnant," Rebecca said, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. 12 weeks along. The joy that flooded through me was immediate and overwhelming. A grandchild. After everything we'd been through, after nearly losing each other completely, we were going to expand our family. "Congratulations," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze both their hands. "This is wonderful news." Trevor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Mom, we want to ask you something important." I waited, sensing the weight of whatever was coming. "We want you to be our child's primary babysitter," he said. "Not because we need cheap childcare, but because we want our baby to grow up knowing the most remarkable woman we know." The words hit me like a physical force. 6 months ago, he'd been trying to put me in assisted living. Now he wanted to entrust me with his child. "We've been talking about it for weeks," Rebecca added. "We want our child to learn about determination and resilience and never giving up on your dreams. Who better to teach those lessons than someone who revolutionized her field while recovering from a stroke in a hospital bed?" I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. I would be honored. Trevor pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table between us. "There's something else. The final payment on the loan, plus interest." I opened the envelope to find a check for $127,000 and a letter written in Trevor's careful handwriting. The letter began, "To the most extraordinary woman I know, who taught me that success means nothing if you forget who helped you achieve it. You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Trevor interrupted. "Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because I want our child to grow up in a family that honors its debts and respects the sacrifices others make for love." As we sat around the table sharing dessert and making plans for the future, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. My stroke hadn't been a tragedy, it had been a revelation. It had forced us all to confront who we really were, and what we meant to each other. "By the way," I said, setting down my coffee cup, "I have some news too. The International Pediatric Therapy Conference wants me to be the keynote speaker next year, in Geneva." Trevor grinned. "My mother, the international keynote speaker. I'm going to need new business cards that say son of Margaret Anderson, revolutionary landscape architect." We laughed together, the sound filling the house that had almost been sold, sitting around the table that had almost been donated, planning a future that had almost been thrown away. Sometimes the most profound victories aren't about defeating others, they're about refusing to let others define the limits of your own potential. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is showing them that it's never too late to bloom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.